What's up, Utah? Welcome back to We Are the People Radio. This is your host, Jason Preston. We've got a very special, specific show we're doing right now. This one is geared to the delegates. This one's not out really for mainstream. This one is geared to the delegates. So all of you who are delegates who really are going to be shaping what Utah looks like in the 2024 elections at convention this coming month. There's been a lot of concern on election integrity in the state of Utah, not only at the primaries, but also at convention itself. And so I was asked if we would do a quick show with a couple of experts here, a couple actually board members, not board members, but representatives of the SEC, which is the governing body of the Republican Party. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them on here, and then we're going to jump into this and hopefully share with you, the delegates, empower you to make the best decision for how the elections are handled at convention. So let's start off. Bob Mcentee, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason.
Bob is a member of the SEC. I know you've been for some time, and the SEC is the governing body of the Republican Party. So that is their job, is to govern that. Alexia is actually on the SEC, and he's also an election chair for the Weber GOP too.
Right.
Correct?
Right, that's right.
Okay, and then Blair, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Blair is also an SEC member, and he's been on the elections committee in the past. So I think we've got a couple guys that definitely understand elections. So let's start with this, because I want to jump right into it. I don't want this to take too long. Why should these delegates? Why are we sending this to them? Why do they need to know about this? What's the concern with elections?
Well, first,
at the convention,
Jason, I know you mean this, but let's say state delegates, because you know what? Virtually every county uses paper ballots, and they don't really have a problem. Right. So we're not talking to the counties. We're just talking state convention. And at the state level, well, we have state bylaws, right, and a state constitution. And that's the slide I've got up here. And I haven't seen this enforced at any convention I've been to yet. So the first bylaw here, we're in our recent bylaws. This is a current one. It says there will be no absentee or proxy voting. So absentee voting would be you can't vote from home. You're supposed to show up and listen to the candidates speak, right? Because sometimes there's multiple rounds and they may get a second speech. So you're supposed to listen and then vote. And proxy voting is you're voting for someone else. And what we've seen, I've been to many conventions. I've been since 2010. I've been at Utah GOP conventions, state ones. And I've seen people with 2 and 3 clickers voting. I've never seen anyone kicked out of convention for voting with 2 or 3 clickers. That shouldn't happen. They're obviously proxy voting for someone else. Or they stole clickers, right? Because Blair has been an eyewitness that people steal clickers. We'll get to that. But to comply with our bylaws, if we're going to use clickers, we need clicker police. But the same problem can be with phones. You know, you could vote from home if they don't somehow geofence it, or you could hand your phone to someone else and let them vote, or it could be not the delegate voting, right? We don't know who's got your phone, right? But if you've got a credential and you walk up to that ballot box, we know it's you that is putting that paper in there. There's a lot of eyewitnesses.
Okay.
Another point is that these bylaws were clearly written with paper voting in mind. And so the next bylaw says voting will be conducted in the convention hall. Well, paper clearly complies with that. It always has. And clickers could too, right? So clickers, you are at least voting in the convention hall, but we still have the problem with absentee or proxy voting. And then it also says in our bylaws that each candidate can have a poll watcher. They get to appoint a poll watcher to go back and watch the votes being counted. And it says the observer may not leave the ballot counting room. So again, it's written with paper in mind because that's where you would count the ballots. They can't leave until the vote tally has been announced. So what we've seen at convention is they want to get around it. They want to say, well, it's quicker to use clickers or it's quicker to use phones, but those methods don't actually comply with our bylaws. And that's our big complaint.
Okay, so the first principle, the reason you're saying we need to use paper ballots is that's what the bylaws or the rules for the Republican Party state.
Right, and for good reason, right?
Okay.
And how can we hold our officials accountable if we don't hold ourselves accountable to follow our own rules?
Okay, fair enough.
So, and Blair anytime, but Blair and I have been on the SEC, and before Blair got on in January 2023, the SEC voted overwhelming. However, the chair made us say that it was a non-binding vote. But we voted overwhelmingly as the governing and policy-making body. That's what's in our Constitution. That's what the SEC is. that we would use paper ballots at convention, and yet the elections committee ignored that, and we didn't use, we used phone voting. Then in 2024, the SEC again overwhelmingly passed a resolution, which is the same one the RNC passed, to return to election integrity. And it calls for using paper ballots, right? And they're talking state, but also meaning the elections that the lieutenant governor oversees. But they're calling on our party leadership. It says right there, I've got it highlighted, the last one. The Utah Republican Party SEC calls on our party leadership, conventions chair, and kind of parties to utilize sequentially numbered paper ballots in our elections. So twice the SEC has called for it. So this new one, we're waiting to see if our elections chair, Dan Burton, appointed by
So the
Rob
RNC, the National Republican Committee, I know they're against ranked choice voting. I know they're against a lot of the ways we vote here in Utah.
Right.
So the National Republican Party is basically warning states, stay away from all the electronic, stick with paper. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
And you're saying that the governing body of the Republican Party, who is supposed to make the rules, the SEC, has requested leadership use paper ballots, but when it's time for convention, they end up bringing clickers or phones or something else to the table.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay. Why should people be concerned about that? Well, I mean, are the clickers, the phones, are they a problem? Does the average delegate here need to even worry about this? I mean, is it splitting hairs if it's just is it worth taking the little extra time, switching things up? How big a deal is it? Why should people care?
Well, maybe it takes extra time. That's actually debatable, because usually we spend about 45 minutes training the delegates and letting them test these electronic voting methods, right? And then later we have technical problems, right? Somebody's phone doesn't work, or maybe their browser's not compatible, right? So if you show up with some Microsoft phone instead of like a Samsung or an Apple, your stuff may not work right. And if you're using a Firefox browser, again, it may not work right. And Blair's run into this.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing is Blair was an eyewitness. In 2023, he was a volunteer at that convention. And what Blair saw
What did you see, Blair?
Well, there was clickers were everywhere, and I was volunteering, and we were guarding the doors, and they basically said, "Look, people are stealing the clickers. You need to guard these doors," and they were taking clickers. We basically had to frisk them. Said, "Look, if I essentially pulled their credentials at a certain point, and we said, look, you're not leaving unless I see your clicker and your credential, and you can get it over."
And you're equating that with fraud?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because there was multiple people that they were basically they had multiple clickers and one credential. And
all right, so you saw people, one credential, multiple clickers, which means they were voting for somebody else.
Yep. Yeah, myself and Elizabeth Carlin was at the other door.
Well, I misspoke. That was the 2022 convention, because that's when Blake Moore was challenged by Andrew Badger, and it came down to single-digit votes between them, because Andrew would have won if he got 60%, and there would have been no support for Congressman Blake Moore. And I'm not picking sides here. I'm just saying it was a close vote. Right. So, and Blair, you said you saw multiple clickers stolen and multiple people using multiple clickers. And I know you told me also that you saw that some clickers were used to vote in all 4 congressional district elections.
What say that again?
So they recorded those votes, and that we basically were kind of watching, and the one clicker would be tallied in multiple regions, in districts.
So you had people voting in every single race, even though they didn't belong in it.
That's correct.
Right, like Blake and I.
All right, so clearly some.
Clickers.
I mean, look, the reason I'm interested in holding this is there's been so many cases that I've been hearing about a fraud at convention, starting with 2022, then 2023, and now here we go again. Right. And I think the thing that people are frustrated about is all we want is to know that the elections are, that there is that we're making it as hard as possible to cheat and easy as possible for us to have transparency on what happened.
And exactly.
Okay. I don't think this point needs to be labored much more than the fact that each of you delegates, when you showed up to caucus and the leadership said, well, we have a system for you with your phones, that was an absolute disaster.
Yes.
Okay. So how many times do we need to see these disasters for us to say, you know what? Why don't we stick with when there is a disaster, what is always the go-to?
Paper.
You go to a hand count just to double check. Why don't we just start with the hand check count? Why are we doing the phones? Why are we doing things that they're difficult to audit? The clickers, the phones. Why don't we just do, is what you're saying, stick to the hand count? It's what the National Republican Party is asking everyone to do. It's what the the SEC body, the governing body, the Republican Party has begged the leadership to do, and yet the leadership won't do it. I mean, I'll be honest, my wife sits on the SEC board, and I'm pretty ticked because I've seen effort after effort after effort be made by the SEC to get Rob Axum and the leadership to use paper ballots. But he wants to surround himself with a team that is the Josh Daniels. We want to do everything digital.
So look, the listeners may have a question. So Blair, when you were at this convention and clickers were being stolen, people were voting with multiple clickers. How many people had their clickers taken away or were kicked out of convention for cheating?
Well, for the ones that came through my door, there was probably half a dozen clickers that were confiscated. We pulled them. They refused
So you
to
stopped
comply.
some of it, but nobody got kicked out.
No.
Right. I've never seen anyone kicked out for cheating,
Right.
and it goes on. I've seen people vote with 2 or 3 clickers, and there's no clicker police. So I did tell the elections chair, Dan Burton, I said, hey, look, if you guys are going to use clickers, and by the way, I don't think they are because they cost a lot. I said, you need clicker police. You need someone to enforce so we can at least try to enforce our no absentee or proxy voting bylaws.
So this year, the rumor is they're going to be voting by phone. They've got some new phone app, again, like the new app we had when it was time to come to caucus. And what you're saying is this, we should stop that before it happens, and we should have paper ballots. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So here's a firsthand experience. So not the last SEC meeting, because that was a special meeting. This is the one before that. I opted to use the provided machine to cast my vote, and it was busy. So Chris Knoll opted to use his cell phone to allow me to vote. My name.
Chris Knowles is the Salt Lake County Republican chair.
Correct.
For those who don't know. Okay.
Right. And Chris and Maxim are part of the technology group. And so I asked Chris, I said, okay, can you help me? And he said, sure, I'll use my phone. I couldn't get my vote to register. It kept hitting on his.
Yeah. I mean, look.
And you know what it was? It was a browser cache issue. So, and it took Chris and I a couple of minutes to figure it out. But here's 2 guys that are tech people, and we finally figured it out. So now you compound that with different phones, different browsers.
How many people are at convention?
Over 4,000.
Over 4,000 people at convention. How many people do you think are going to have issues with their technology?
A lot.
Okay, you've got some important races. You got Phil Lyman for governor. You've got a very tight Senate race between Stags. You've got J.R. Bird, or not J.R. Bird, Stags. You've got Jason Walton. You've got Carolyn Pippin. You've got
Brad Wilson
and
John Curtis.
Romney 2.0, John Curtis. That's a huge race.
Yes.
Okay, and I will tell you, it is going to be tight.
It's
the winner
going to
of
be
that.
very contentious.
You've got regular congressional races that are going to be very tight. I just don't see how we wouldn't want to make. What's the margin of error on the phones? We saw what a disaster it was at the caucus. And if you have 5%, that's enough to change the outcome of the race.
Yes.
There was something good happen in Salt Lake County under Chris Null. When they ran their convention, they used paper ballots. Somebody went to vote, and they were voting with 2 paper ballots, right? They had 2 in there, and they got caught doing it because you can see.
Yeah,
right.
So it's harder to cheat with paper ballots.
And they got busted, and it made the news, right?
Okay.
And then can I point out our Senate candidates, right? Carolyn Pippin, she knows there's like 10 people running, right? And also Trent Staggs and Brent Hatch. We asked them, hey, what's your preference for? And they all said paper because they want that ability to recount. Carolyn told me personally she wants paper. Trent Staggs emphatically wants paper. Brent Hatch said he wants paper too because he said that they're not going to be handed off for proxy voting. So thank you. They're making our case.
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, unless you're deep establishment, I mean, this House Majority Leader, I mean, I don't care. He's establishment. You become House Majority Leader without being establishment.
Yeah.
And he's the only one that says, hey, let's do phone. And then Carson also is down for clickers, but not phone. And that's what they're trying to use as phones. I think people know the technology is just not there. And that's why, again, the National Republican Committee nationally has condemned this stuff. Why are we doing it? And again, you talk about Utah. I know one of the things you were talking about on here, right here. Utah is ranked in the bottom of the country in election integrity. We are the only state, the Republican state, that uses Dominion machines, that uses ERIC, that uses universal mail-in voting, and that also uses ranked choice voting. Every system that has been identified for fraud is implemented in Utah. I don't understand. If we've got this reputation, it seems like let's deal with it. Let's get paper ballots. Let's get this monkey off our back so that we know that, hey, there is no problems here in Utah.
It's cheap to use paper and it's recountable. And actually, this is the state's ranked, the Utah State, by the heritage.org. And right in the heritage.org, they're not out to get Utah. They ranked all the states, right? We just are 32nd rather. But why not have the GOP be the example? Why not have us be the good guys and go, you know what? We used paper ballots and we used sequentially numbered because that's a security feature so that you can see if there's any duplicate ballots. And if there are, you know what? You can throw out the duplicates.
Yeah, I mean, look, Florida has made, and everyone loves Florida. Everyone loves DeSantis. He'd be a great governor. He'd be a great president. We'd love to have DeSantis. Well, you know what DeSantis did for elections after 2020? He went through and got rid of universal mail-in voting. He went through everything Utah is doing. They scratched and got rid of, and they went to something secure.
That's right.
Why can't Utah lead? And the reason we're doing this for you guys is this is your chance to take control of the elections, of the convention. You have the power to do that. You've got people, the SEC that has been banging their head against the wall, and the leadership refuses to do it.
Well, that's a good point. Now, I'd like to jump in and kind of elaborate a little bit. Well over 6 months ago, probably a year ago, we approached Chris Knowles and Max Sims. And because I'm a tech person, I said, look, okay, understand that's where you guys want to go with this, but where's your proof of concept? And for me personally on the SEC, the only way I'm going to buy off on any kind of technology is to broaden it, have 2 representatives for each county, jump into a process and take a look at the technology. Once it's vetted, proven, and voted upon, okay, then let's see then.
But they don't even give the governing body the ability to see that.
Of course not.
And, Blair's a tech guy, right? So he's not a troglodyte. He's not afraid of technology.
I'm a tech guy.
Right. And I'm a history major, right? So I can't quite claim the same, but I've got some technical training from the Air Force and from being a navigator and a pilot for them. But I've got House District 10 candidate, Ignacio Valdez, Nacho. He says paper's king. We can always come back and recount. It's more transparent. An app can be manipulated. He's a tech guy. He builds websites for a living. Blair works on networks for big customers. So we've even got the tech people acknowledging, paper is safer.
Okay.
And there are candidates. There are customers. I think we should please the customers like you guys are saying.
Well, our election committee is stonewalled us. And they basically they played us up to a point.
This is the GOP, the Utah
Correct.
Republican Party.
Correct. Yeah, no, I personally feel like this is one of those continuing resolution moments where, oh, yeah, we're working on things, and then the last minute, it's like, here, sign off here, and, oh, we've run out of time. Sorry, guys.
My wife's, like I said, Alexia is on the board, yes, or not the board. She's a member of the SEC. And so by virtue of that, I go to every meeting and sit on every meeting with her. And I will tell you, I've watched you guys. I've watched, people from within there, every single meeting strive to get the leadership to move towards paper ballots. And it is like and honestly, it's been one of the things that's made me almost give up hope on the whole convention process, because I see how to what great lengths that leadership goes through to keep you guys from being able to get paper ballots. And to me, that's inexcusable.
It's been going on a long time. I'll tell you, in 2018, when the party was kind of broke under Rob Anderson and with the SB 54 controversy and lawsuit going on, we really didn't have the money for clickers. So we were going to use paper. But then Governor Herbert stepped in and said, you know what, I'll pay for those clickers. And
I'll bet he would.
yeah, it seems nice, but you're also like, why are they so insistent that we must have clickers? We don't want paper ballots, right? Because again, paper ballots, they can be numbered, they can be colored, they can have a watermark for security, and you can recount, you can watch what's going on. It'd be hard to cheat. We've done this at the county level.
We've never had anybody dispute.
No complaints whatsoever.
No, I mean, this is why the RNC wants it. This is why nationally,
right,
those who are concerned about elections, it is always paper ballots. And again, look at Venezuela, look at America, look at 2020. I mean, you almost have to be off your rocker to think that in 2020 there was no fraud.
Right.
You know, you have to be off your rocker to think that there's no fraud in Utah when we're ranked at the bottom and when we're governed by absolute rhinos. You know, Cox being Cox and I mean, you look at, you know, Romney and Curtis, and I mean, it is the Utah model is these progressive candidates and politicians, and it's because we've got problems, and I think this is one of the issues that needs to be hit. What is this? So
I've got an example because people sometimes they think that the phone voting, you can look up your vote and stuff, but then again with clickers, you don't know who voted, you don't know if they were authorized, but with paper ballots, you know, you can very easily screen if they're sequentially numbered. You can screen for, are there duplicates, right? We can order the ballots and see if there's a challenge, right? And humans can notice if they get two of the same number ballot. But we can also use colors, which is just helpful so people know they're voting in the right round. You know, round one, let's say for the congressional district, could be a white ballot. Round two could be yellow. Okay. You know, same with Senate. Round three.
So we got 10 minutes. Walk me through and walk our delegates through so they can see how this process would work if we went to paper ballots.
Okay. Well, we've done it in Weber County, and it can be fast, by the way. That's one thing. In fact, let me tell you a political. I'll leave that slide up because we count 300 paper ballots in about 8 minutes and have the report in 10 minutes. And you just multiply that out. You scale it for state convention. You have 10 times as many counters, right? So it's going to go fast. But politically, I remember, I forget what was it, 2020, whatever it was. But it was when Carson Jorgensen got elected, probably 2021 as chair. Well, Stuart Pay was kind of the favorite establishment guy, right? And we were using phones to vote again. And a lot of people had left convention. And I think the establishment, they kept drawing out when they're going to close balloting because the wrong guy was winning. They knew that Carson was winning. They wanted Stuart Pay to win. So they said, hey, we're going to keep the voting open for a little while longer. That went on for like 20 extra minutes. So this whole thing about, it's faster. Well, no, it's not. Not when the establishment isn't ready to call it because they don't like who's winning. But finally, so they're texting my opinion, right? It's just my opinion. But they're texting their buddies going, hey, you need to vote for Stuart. You need to vote. And then it just wasn't happening. Carson was winning. So finally they gave up, said, okay, it's over. Carson won. So
yeah, it was a big deal when he came on.
You can be manipulated, right? With the clickers or with the phones. The chair gets to say when voting's over. But you can see when people have voted by paper because there's a line and then the line goes away.
Right.
And everybody knows. And you can start counting the ballots, by the way, before everybody's voting.
I mean, this is the same thing they did during 2020. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
How many decades have we been using paper?
Yeah.
Generations, yes. Right? But it's fast, right? And there's no training time. There's no technical problem.
So in the past, one of my concern is it would get brought up at convention, and then it's, you know, hey, all the yays. It's in the debate, and I mean, you spend 30 minutes it's a circus trying to just bring it to a vote, and then by the time the circus is over and you have the vote, I think half the people are just so frustrated because they're impatient. They sign up to be a delegate, but they don't really care. They're there and they want to get home as fast as possible, which shame on you guys because this is your civic. Don't sign up to be a delegate if you're not going to stand up and pay the dues. I mean, God, good grief. I mean, it's this is it's important. It's sacred.
When I was the clicker police, I was an alternate. I went down and volunteered just because I wanted to see what state was about. So it's about the participation. So
when we try to do it day of, like it happened in 2023, it was definitely a bit of a cluster because I think people didn't want to hang out. They're just getting impatient. What is your strategy?
Well,
and why are we doing this? What is your strategy? What do you want these people to know? Are you going to try to do it day of and they need to be ready, or do you have a different plan?
Well, a lot of delegates told me that they're not against using paper ballots. They just didn't want to try to fold it in at the last minute, right? And then some of the establishment tried to smear us and say, hey, we haven't seen these ballots. We don't know what's on them. Like they're trying to say like we somehow pre-cheated or something, right? So I think there was some nervousness. What I would like to see is that our elections chair, Dan Burton, his email's dan.burton@gmail.com, and we'll publish these emails. He needs to know if delegates care, if they want paper ballots, right? Because he needs to make that decision that we're going to print these ballots and have them ready, because these are kind of complex races. And if you do it right, you can have a smooth election. We've done it in Weber County. We tallied about 300 ballots in about 8 minutes, and then a couple minutes to verify them, right? Because you want to make sure you don't want to go back and oops. So 10 minutes for 300 ballots. And usually, you know, even at a full convention, we don't always have 4,000 people, or they don't necessarily stick around, but 3,500, we can scale it. So we had 4 tables counting. If you had maybe 20 tables, the handling time for ballots, 2 or 3 seconds. Depends how many candidates are on there.
Very fast.
But humans get faster, right? Because they know, okay, for Senate, they learn pretty quick. These are the top 3 names we're going to see, and they mark it down on the paper, and somebody else is watching. So it's the whole speed thing. It's not that slow.
Okay. So what is your strategy? Yeah.
So one of the things that delegates absolutely have to understand is that there is so many problems with the phones. This is a crapshoot.
I mean, we saw it at caucus.
And so in leadership, they're running out the clock, just like they do on a lot of things. And we need the delegates and people to raise up and talk to leadership and say, we want paper ballots. We've designed paper ballots. We've got the system. The system works. If we actually got with leadership, we could work with them and put that together. It could be ready.
So run us through this, and then I've got a comment I want to make.
Okay. So Weber County, we voted, our executive committee voted to use paper ballots and to collect them in transparent boxes, right? So everybody can see what's going on all the time. And we had 4 counting tables to count the 300 ballots. We waited till everybody had voted. You can also start when just some of the votes are in, you can start counting them, right?
Okay.
You don't have to wait for all of them.
Let's go.
And then we've got people that are poll watchers, so they just watch. They make sure there's no mistakes. They can challenge in real time. They can spot and go, hey, who did they mark, right? Or I think they marked 2 people, throw that one out. And then we have an auditor who can look it over, who can verify the numbers, make sure it's right, make sure we don't have more people voting than were credentialed, right? And all that can happen quickly. Again, 300 people in 10 minutes from walking out the door with the ballots to be counted to walking back in with the results, that's 10 minutes. So you could scale it so it would be, I would say, probably 15 to 20 minutes for a round of voting at state. But actually, I think also idle time for delegates to talk is not all bad. I think delegates can talk to each other. Why'd you vote for that guy? Who are you going to vote for next, right?
As we were discussing before.
At the SEC, we do that all the time.
So there's a delay in counting. How long's the delay going to be when people line up because they have problems with their phones?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we saw that. I mean, look, caucus. Okay, I don't think we need to go any further than what happened at caucus. It was a disaster.
Exactly.
And now now that you've got all the leadership or the SEC, not all, but many of the SEC members begging and imploring the leadership to simply use paper ballots. And honestly, the way they are so pushed back against it actually to me looks suspicious. I mean, why would you push back so hard against the governing body, against the rules themselves, against resolutions that were passed, everything that the governing body has done? If they hold any power at all, they should be able to demand paper ballots. The fact of the matter is, the governing body has been gutted of power when you have a leadership team that basically railroads you guys every time. And I say it because I've watched it over and over and over every time I've been to one of your meetings.
Every time. And they turned off our mic. The last special meeting, we were actually told that volunteerism was accepted and encouraged. Jason, I've signed up for 5 committees. Never got a call once.
Well,
because you're not the right. Yeah. And then meanwhile, the people that they put on the election committee are all the suspect people.
Exactly. And I spoke to Max Sims and Chris Knoll specifically, And I know Chris. I know of him. We both worked at Symantec. I started my career at the Peter Norton Group. So I'm very well aware of tech. So I spoke to them about this tech stuff. Said, look, guys, you got to do a proof of concept. If you don't do a proof of concept, it's just like anything you do. If you don't do a proof of concept and roll it out to your customers, our customers are our delegates and the people voting, and our candidates. And if you don't do that, then we're crazy.
Yeah, I mean, especially after we already saw the fiasco of Super Tuesday.
Well,
all right, so we're running out of time. Run us through this over a very high level, because I think what I wanted to know is, what are you asking people to do? Are you asking people to show up and change it day of, or are you trying to say, let's put pressure on the leadership?
Yes, put pressure on the leadership now so they can plan it out. You don't want anybody to have to do this last minute, right? So let's let Rob Axon know that even if he's delegated this authority, he's still responsible. And we want them to know we want paper ballot. The SEC already said it. Our bylaws kind of indicate it. But we just, hey, it might take a little longer, but we're all willing to do it. And the candidates too. Our customers, the candidates, are willing.
Okay, so your ask is let's put the pressure on these guys beforehand, and so they come using paper ballots. So they come not using phones, they come using paper ballots.
Right. And, actually at the caucus, one guy famously, he yelled at Rob Axon. He says, "Why do I need a phone to vote?" I thought it was great, because he's got a good question. Why do I need
he's one of our over 50 crowd.
Well, he was an older guy. I think he was frustrated, and he just yelled out, "Why do I need a phone to vote?" And nobody really, Rob did answer him. But the fact is, why does he need a phone to vote? Why can't you just show up with your ID, get credentialed, and then vote like our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers have, right?
Well, here's my concern. Utah is a very interesting state, and we don't talk about this, and this is a huge problem. Most states have a secretary of state who is elected by the people to oversee elections. That is the right way to do it. The elections are handled by the Secretary of State, who is accountable to the voice of the people.
Right.
In Utah, let's just take a note what we have allowed to happen. We have allowed our governor to remove the Secretary of State as being someone elected by the voice of the people, and instead someone he appointed, i.e. Deidre Hendrickson.
Right.
So we have a system in Utah. Think about if this was nationally. Think about if Biden said, we're going to handle elections at a national level, and the person overseeing it is going to be my person that I pick. And if you question it, I'm going to have a billboard campaign going after everybody for putting the democracy is in trouble because people don't believe in it.
Yeah, don't question the voting czar.
Right. That has to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, and it begins with you guys here at convention. You want to get Phil Lyman, you want to get some of these people in who will stand up against some of these things. That starts with you taking control of the elections, not letting Cox be in charge of Deidre and then make sure he's got, the leadership of the GOP doing his will. If you do not get control of this, we already know the rest of the main elections handled by universal mail-in voting, which means the average person who has a low IQ, who's never studied the issues, who's going to vote only based on who has the most money and whatever commercial he saw last. This is why it's almost impossible to get good candidates. But you have the ability at least to say the convention matters. Yep. You matter as a delegate.